Matthew chapter 5. Just to catch us up a little bit, last week, we've been in the Sermon on the Mount now for 2 weeks. Last week we started out and we were in verses 17 through 20. We did a big portion the first week. We went through the first 16 verses. Then the following week, last week, we went through verses 17 through 20. And last week we looked at Jesus making this really substantial point for where we're at today. He's making this point that I didn't come to tear down the law. I didn't come to tear down everything that was in the Old Testament. He's like, that's not the point of why I'm here and what my ministry is. He talked about how all of God's word up to the point where he came to this earth was still really important, but he was making the definitive point that all of the word of God that was there before he got here was pointing directly to him as the fulfillment of all of it. The law was important. Jesus made the point. The standards were there because, it's not good for us to live without standards, because if we lived without standards, we'd probably do a lot of dumb stuff. God gave a set of standards to show people that, we would never live up to his standard, that we would never be able to live up to the holiness of God, and that left us understanding that we needed him. And we needed him to fix it, and the fulfillment of all of those things was Jesus coming to fix it. And he did that. The law paved the way for us to understand that we need him. And so, as we get to the point where we're at today, Jesus is still talking to these people up on this mountain. It's the Sermon on the Mount. He's continuing with his lesson on the heart of the law and the heart of Scripture. And he has a specific lesson to take it even deeper today. And we're going to read verses 21 through 30. It says, Matthew 5, starting in verse 21, it says, "You have heard that it was said to those of old, 'You shall not murder. And whoever murders will be in danger of the judgment. But I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of judgment. And whoever says to his brother, Raca, shall be in danger of the council. But whoever says, you fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. Therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift before the altar and go on your way. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Agree with your adversary quickly while you are on the way with him, lest your adversary deliver you to the judge hand you over to the officer, and you be thrown into prison. Assuredly, I say to you, you will by no means get out of there until you have paid the last penny.' And then he continues and says, 'You have heard that it was said of old that you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. For it is more profitable for you that one of your members should perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. And if you remember that if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you. For it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell.'" And this is a, pretty strong topic of a passage. And the reason why we're here is because we're literally going through the whole book of Matthew, and we're going to see Jesus' teaching point by point as he goes through this. And today that brings us once again to, sometimes things that can be a hard conversation. A lot of times people don't like talking about sin. But as we've talked about in previous weeks, it's dramatically important for us to deal with them, to deal with sin in light of us being able to effectively follow Jesus. Sin and Jesus lie in two different directions. If we're going to follow him, we've got to be dealing with that stuff so we can follow him better. So, last week, we talked about these scribes and these Pharisee guys. These guys were doing all this, so they were writing like extra laws. They were bringing all of these extra commands and stipulations to the law. All of this extra stuff, just extra. And like I said, the history of it shows us that there's a book of their writings of these laws that's over 800 pages long. And then there's a commentary on this extra law that's 80 books long. It's a lot of extra stuff. And these guys were dedicating their lives to following the letters of all of these rules. They were following the letter of all of the rules and the regulations. And the culture that looked at these guys probably looked at them as probably the most righteous men on earth because they looked good. They were following the letter of the law. But Jesus, and that's what he's pointing out to us here, Jesus wasn't tricked by their outward appearances. He is Jesus. He's God. He's able to see the condition of their hearts. And I read a couple of verses last week in Matthew 23. We don't need to turn there, but I'll just read these really quick because it makes the point really clear. Matthew 23, the entire chapter is dedicated to dealing with these guys. But Jesus talks to them and he says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you are like whitewashed tombs, which indeed appear beautiful outwardly, but inside are full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness. Even so, you also outwardly appear righteous to men, but inside you're full of hypocrisy and lawlessness." That's the issue. That's why Jesus is bringing the lesson that we're seeing in our passage today. People were following the law to the letter, but they hadn't understood and lived the heart of it. Jesus is talking to these guys, and he's like, "You guys look great on the outside, but inside you're a bunch of hypocrites. Your heart doesn't reflect your actions. You're just putting on a show for everyone else, and that's just not good enough." God's interested in, for us, God's interested in so much more than just surface level showing of works. And again, that's why Jesus is teaching this today. So as we get into verse 21, the start of our passage, Jesus' first subject is murder. It's a pretty hard subject. His first lesson to these people is murder. And like we can think that's pretty straightforward. Like obviously I shouldn't murder someone. This is, when he's pulling these points out, Jesus is referencing back to the Ten Commandments. It's the most basic, the core element of the law. As we talked about last week, there's different ways that people reference the law, whether it was the Ten Commandments, the first 5 books of the Bible, all of the Old Testament. Those were all referred to as the law. But Jesus is even breaking it down to the simplest form, the Ten Commandments. It's like, you shall not murder. You see that back in Exodus 20, but in verse 21 here, Jesus, he recites that passage from the Ten Commandments. It says, "You shall not murder," in verse 21. So I think we understand that. We're not supposed to murder people. And for these guys, that was the letter of the law. That was as far as it was to go. Like, okay, yeah, I know I'm not supposed to kill somebody. But Jesus is like, is the point we're making, Jesus is like, I care about more than that. I care about more than that. I care that you don't murder people. It's the point that he's making here. But I also care about your heart and your thoughts towards other people as well. Jesus continues in verses 22 and 23. He says, "You shall not murder. Whoever murders will be in danger of judgment." But in 22 and 23, he says, "But I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of judgment. And whoever says to his brother, 'Raca,' shall be in danger of the council. But whoever says, 'You fool,' shall be in danger of hellfire." I want you to notice something. I want you to notice the authority with which Jesus is speaking here. Jesus is talking about God's word. The entire context of this passage is he's talking about the law and the prophets. He's talking about God's word up to this point. But now Jesus is speaking in a very specific authority. And in verse 21, he starts talking about, he says, "People from old have told you, this has been talked about, this has been taught before." He says, "You have heard these things of old from generations before." But Jesus now, notice the authority, says, "But I say to you." There's a lot of authority in that statement as Jesus is referencing the word of God, and he as God is taking the authority to now kind of shine a new light on these people's understanding. Jesus says, "But I say to you." All of these other people, throughout all these generations, they've been saying and they've been doing whatever they were doing, but Jesus is like, now it's time to listen to me. And I have all of the authority to tell you like it really is. And as that authority, because Jesus is God, and this is his word, he tells these people that it's not just the letter of the law. It's not just don't murder. Like I said, that's really important. But it's also about what's going on in your heart and in your mind as you engage with other people. He says whoever is angry with his brother will also be in danger of judgment. He, in this context, he's calling anger a sin, just like murder would be a sin. Jesus, in this translation, he uses this word raka, or calling someone a fool. And the word raka is an insult against someone's intelligence. That's what it's there for. It's for in our day and age, it's like, calling somebody an idiot, calling them stupid. It's an insult against their intelligence. The word fool there, I think we better understand that, but that's an insult against somebody's character. It's like, it's almost like a looking down on somebody. It's like calling them a fool. Like somebody doesn't live as well as we do or something. It's almost like we're looking down on them, calling them a fool. But Jesus, as he's expounding in this passage towards these people that he's teaching, Jesus takes this heart of anger and a mouth that speaks insults towards other people. He's telling the people that, yes, the letter of the law is do not murder. He says, but check your heart and your actions. You've been taught that you are just not supposed to go this far. Just don't go this far. But there are so many steps along that road to get to that point that are still wrong in God's eyes. And that should be really important to us. There were people teaching and telling other people at this time that as long as you don't go this far, you're fine. That's the letter of the law. As long as you don't actually murder somebody, you're good. But that missed the heart of the law. That missed God's heart in the law. I said, obviously murder is a horrible thing. And unfortunately, it's something I see way too much of, honestly, in my line of work. I probably deal with a different murder case on my desk every single day. And it's something I see constantly. It's a horrible thing. But murder typically has its roots in something else. And oftentimes, the root from which murder happens is a root of anger, oftentimes. And that's why Jesus is connecting the heart to the law here. And it presents an interesting question for us. Jesus is bringing anger into the conversation. We see that here in this passage. And so we have to ask, is anger in and of itself a sin? I don't think we ask that question very often. Jesus says that if you are angry with another, he doesn't say if you murdered them. He says if you're angry with another, you're liable to judgment because of it. That's what he says here. I want to go to another passage together. This is in Ephesians chapter 4. This is a number of books to the right in your Bible. And if you want to stay where you're at, feel free and I will read it. But Ephesians chapter 4, and I'll give you a moment. We're going to be in Ephesians 4. We're going to start in verse 25. We're going to read 25 down to the end of the chapter. So, Ephesians 4, starting in verse 25. And it says, therefore, putting away lying, let each one of you speak truth with his neighbor, for we are members of one another. And then it says, listen to this, it says, be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your wrath, nor give place to the devil. Let him who steals steal no longer, But rather let him labor, working with his hands what is good, that he may have something to give him who has need. Let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, that you may impart grace to the hearers. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, by whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. It says, let all bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, and evil speaking be put away from you, with all malice. And be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God in Christ forgave you. There's a lot of people that want to give a pass for anger. And sometimes there's even fancy words used like righteous indignation, which basically means righteous anger. But just because you slap a fancy coat of paint on the word anger doesn't magically make it okay. And that's the point. And oddly enough, this passage in Ephesians is often used as a justification for anger. There's people that look at this and they say, see, it says in verse 26 there, it says, be angry and do not sin. But what we need to understand is that there is a difference between the emotion of anger and acting on it. There are a lot of things in this world that we might experience or see that might cause an emotion to rise in us. There might be an anger emotion that rises up in us. And we can't necessarily stop that emotion response. But we absolutely have the choice of what we're going to do with it. Are we going to give in to that anger? Are we going to let it stay? Are we even going to go so far as to act on it? If we break down the wording of this verse, we could say something to the effect, if you look at these words and how they were written, we could say something to the effect that as you are getting angry, the emotion, don't sin. Don't accept it. Don't give into it. Don't get angry. Don't let it stay. I said sometimes people like to use a verse like this as a crutch for a problem. But again, that misses the heart of what's being taught in it. That passage in Ephesians is actually not even where it was originally written. That's quoted out of Psalm chapter 4. And Paul, when he was writing to the Ephesians, actually didn't even put the whole quote in there. But the quote from Psalm chapter 4 is, be angry and do not sin. But then it follows it with another statement. It says, meditate within your heart on your bed and be still. That's the full quote of that passage. And when you bring the rest of that context in, it becomes much clearer what's being said. Because when you're feeling angry, you go lay down on your bed and you think about it. Sometimes that's not good for people. Sometimes it's just the thoughts are running wild. But the purpose here, though, is go think about it. And hopefully in the, Jesus transforming your heart and mind element of our life, that as we're thinking about it, the understanding comes that it was probably something dumb to be angry about in the first place. That there's probably a better way to engage with the situation than with anger. See, none of these verses, none of it's a pass for anger. It's saying when the emotion of anger begins to come, get rid of it. It's never going to lead us to good places. It's made all the more clear in verse 31 of Ephesians 4, where it literally says that all anger should be put away from us. There is literally no exceptions in that statement. When it says all, it absolutely means all. No exceptions. No, but this sounds good. But, I feel like I'm righteous in being angry this time. No, it says all. Understand that. That's why when James is writing James chapter 1, he says, James, when he's writing, he says, for the anger of man will never produce the righteousness of God. Ever. Period. The truth of what all of these passages are saying is that our anger can never be in line with God's righteousness. Psalm 37 tells us that anger and wrath only lead to harm or evil. When we read about the fruits of the Spirit, in Galatians 5, we find things like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. The whole point of that passage says if we walk and follow the Spirit of God, that those are the fruits that our life are supposed to bear. How in the world would anger ever fit into those characteristics? If we are supposed to be loving, joyful, peaceful, patient, kind, good, faithful, gentle, and in self-control, where does anger fit? It doesn't. There's a reason why that point's being made in Ephesians 4. It says, don't ever let the sun go down on your wrath or your anger. It says, or give a place for the devil. Because think about that. And it's why Jesus is teaching the heart of this right now. He says don't murder, but he says there's more heart behind this. Because if we don't get rid of that emotion of anger immediately that's creeping in, as it's welling up, as we need to deal with that, as we need for it to be gone, if we let it stay, then that's a place for the devil to hang out. That's what Ephesians is saying. He'll hang out there. He'll leverage that anger. He'll keep fueling that fire. And that sort of anger can become all sorts of bad things. That's how some people end up at the point of murder. And that's why we're dealing with the heart first. Because these things aren't right before God, and they can lead to much worse places. Anger will never take you to a good place. None of it will ever align with the righteousness of God. So Jesus has dealt with literal murder. He started peeling back the layers back in Matthew 5. He dealt with literal murder. He's peeling back the layers of the heart that leads to murder. And Jesus continues into the next verses, and he reminds us that we need to deal with the issues that we have between us and other people before trying to be all religious with God. Matthew 5 and 23 and 24, in Jesus' teaching, and he says, therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar, and there you remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer the gift. What Jesus is teaching us here is that God is so much more interested in us actually doing right by him and towards other people than he is by us performing some sort of religious duty. I think maybe we can get into this mindset of like, oh, I do all of these things for the Lord. So he's not going to be so concerned with these issues that I have with people. But Jesus is saying, he's like, the offering is great. Like, God will accept the offering. But let's deal with the issues first. Let's deal with the issues so that we can be in the right place when we seek to do the right things. Like over and over through this whole Sermon on the Mount so far in these last weeks, it's about the condition of the heart before the actions. The actions don't mean much if they come from a messed up heart. They greatly devalue what the action is. And I know, as all of us have dealt with plenty of people situations, we've all been in different situations. We've all dealt with different hard things. We've all dealt with different problems. Sometimes our fault, maybe somebody else's fault. Maybe it was somebody else's fault, and then we became a problem in the situation, and now it's our fault too. But we've all dealt with different situations. There's a passage in Romans 12 that tells us, it says, if it is possible, as much as it depends on you, live peaceably with all men. It's saying there's responsibility on our part. It's saying that we take the step to try to be at peace with other people. Sometimes another person won't want peace. Sometimes they won't. But don't let that ever be because we didn't try for it. We try for it in love. The core of the point here that Jesus is making, the core that we need to see, is that we need to get our hearts right so that we can worship the Lord from a right heart in a right place. In verses 25 and 26, and we won't really break these down, they're kind of straightforward, but Jesus says, deal with it quickly. He says, agree with your adversary quickly, while you're on the way with him, lest your adversary deliver you to the judge hand you over to the officer, and you be thrown into prison. Assuredly, I say to you, you will by no means get out of there until you have paid the last penny. Jesus is saying, let's deal with these things quickly. Let's not let them sit around. That's even what the other passage says is, don't let the sun go down on your anger. Deal with it quickly. Get rid of it today. Why do you want it for tomorrow if you can at least try to deal with it today? And Jesus is saying that if we don't deal with these things, then sometimes it has consequences. Like here, it's talking about a major dispute between people, and Jesus is like, you don't want to deal with it, then maybe he'll have the law deal with it. There's consequences. A lot of times our actions do have consequences. Obviously, we've known that since we were kids, hopefully. But Jesus is continuing the same teaching. I said murder, anger, the heart, these things. And in the very same teaching, he's bringing another subject to the table. Verses 27 and 28. He says, you have heard that it was said of old, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. Actually, I'll stop right there for now. 27 and 28. So again, this is a letter of the law, heart of the law issue. It's the same teaching. It's just another point to further deepen the message that Jesus was saying. He says the letter of the law before was, don't commit adultery. We should understand that. I mean, it goes all the way back to the Ten Commandments that we've known. And again, Jesus in his authority says, I'm going to say to you a little bit more than that. Jesus goes to the heart behind these things and says that looking at another woman or lusting for another person has already polluted your heart. That your heart would already have adultery in it at that point, even if the action hasn't been taken yet. Even if you haven't stepped forward into the action, pursued the action, actually committed the action, just it sitting inside your heart and the desires and all of those things, it's like it's already there. It just hasn't become acted on yet. And mind you, as we're reading through these things, that Jesus isn't saying that the thought of anger is the exact same thing as murder, and that lust is the exact same thing as physically engaging in adultery. He's not saying that. They're both serious. Don't ever miss that. But what he is saying here, and the point that he's making, is that there's more to the message that people have been missing. Again, where he's teaching a specific group of people at this time that they've been getting taught all of this other stuff. These scribes and these Pharisees stepped in and had all this other stuff to teach, but it was extra. It wasn't the heart and the Word of God. It was all of these extra things that they brought to the table. Jesus is telling them that it's not okay to have our heart polluted with these things, even if we haven't acted on them yet. And for us, obviously, we live in a world where, so much of it is hypersexualized now. That's just how it is. But that's not anything new. We're not, uniquely new to this situation. I think sometimes we think we're unique in how bad the sin situation is in our world right now. But maybe that's go look at history. Go back to the Roman Empire and all. There was crazy stuff going on back then. We just do it in a different form now. I mean, a lot of it's still functionally the same, but it looks different in culture. I think for us, perhaps, in this day and age, that in this realm and lust and such, that it's become a lot more accessible easily. I mean, there's so much junk in, all forms of media and social media, and of course the temptations that we still run into with people. But Jesus is dealing with our hearts and telling us that we can't get caught up with this stuff at any level of it. Whether it's on the path towards the action or the action itself, don't get caught up in any of it. It's a pollution of the heart. Even if we never act on any of this, even if we never act on something and actually get caught in adultery, that our heart can still be full of it. I mean, for us, be thankful that we have a very loving, forgiving, merciful, and gracious God. He tells us if we have been down these roads, if we have done these things, that He's faithful, that He is forgiving, that He is faithful and just to forgive all things that we go to Him and ask for forgiveness for. He does that. He's good like that. Doesn't mean that we don't need to get it fixed, though. In going through this, I don't think we really had to deal with the fact earlier that murder's wrong. We get that. I think we did need to deal with the fact that anger is a sin. I absolutely believe that. I think the Bible fundamentally backs that up. I think it's often mislabeled or ignored. But then you have, as we just looked at, we have lust and adultery. And these things, in this day and age, they might be getting to the area where maybe some people will just say, well, these are morally questionable things, but they're pretty well accepted in culture. Like, these aren't very taboo in culture things anymore. And again, they weren't even in previous times. But maybe they aren't really considered that serious in our day and age right now. But then we see Jesus. If we don't consider these things serious, we see that Jesus goes into extreme response mode in verses 29 and 30. And maybe that should cause us to rethink this. Verses 29 and 30, with all of these things before it that Jesus has talked about. But in 29 and 30, he says, if your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. For it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you. For it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. Now, Jesus' words here are a figure of speech. He is speaking with extreme language because He's dealing with the sin in our heart that sometimes requires an extreme response. Jesus' whole time has been taking the basic rule-following mentality of before and shifting the focus to questioning the health of our hearts before God. It wouldn't make any sense to take literally in the sense of an extreme outward approach of mutilating our body, because that still wouldn't stop the ability of us letting sin into our heart. Jesus is stressing the point that our response to these things shouldn't be half-hearted or small gestures. He's saying that these things are serious and demand serious action. So let's not actually gouge out an eye or cut off a hand. But maybe we can see some things in our life that maybe we know aren't good for us. Maybe we're engaging with things that we know will lead us to sin. And maybe before the thought process was, it's only my mind that's not affecting other people. Like, nobody else knows about it. Obviously, God knows about it. You go to Psalm 139 where it talks about God's perfect knowledge of man. It says he knows every word before it comes off your lips. He knows every thought that comes into your mind before it gets there. He knows before you lay down, before you wake up. He knows every single thing. He knows, even if other people don't. Maybe before we thought it was just in our mind and it didn't affect anything. Jesus is making the very strong point to us today that he cares about the condition of our hearts. Know today that our heart and our mind matter before the Lord. So maybe when we see the extreme response that Jesus is putting here, maybe the best question for us today is, how far are you willing to go, and how much would you be willing to give up to keep our heart in the right place before the Lord? Maybe there's people we hang around with that lead us to bad places. The Bible says that bad company corrupts good morals. Maybe we need to cut ties or limit time with certain people. That doesn't mean you don't ever hang out with somebody that doesn't know Jesus. We're supposed to be a bridge of Jesus to the people that don't know him. We show love, we care, we're still there for people. But if we know that a specific situation is leading us towards sin, let's change the situation. Maybe there's things that are causing us to be angry. I mean, man. And this isn't a one way or the other thing, but if there is anything in this world that I think has drawn people into anger in the last few years, it's the division of politics. Like, that has caused so much anger. And anger, as we've seen, it will never produce the righteousness of God. If that's causing us to be angry with other people, maybe we need to lay down that focus and focus on our kingdom citizenship. We're God's people first. Yes. We're his kingdom first. Every decision, every thought, everything should be centered on his kingdom. I'm thankful to live here. I'm so much more thankful I'm a citizen of the kingdom of God. Absolutely. Maybe some device like our phone or computer or something is giving us too easy of access to sin. You know, I've talked to some people and maybe it's time to get rid of the device and go back to the old trusty flip phone. Less opportunity there. I've been in a situation to help people do that. Because it's like, it's as convenient as it is to have this really powerful computer in your pocket, if it's leading you to sin, get rid of it. Extreme response. Maybe, and I think of King David in Scripture. King David, if you go back and read his story, he had a command given to him to be leading the armies of the Lord into battle. But you find him this one day, and it says, and David wasn't out leading the armies of the Lord into battle. It says he was at home, sitting in his room, and he walked out on a balcony, and he saw temptation on that balcony. By him not doing what he was supposed to be doing for the Lord, that laziness led to opportunity for sin. Maybe for us, we're not doing what we need to be doing for the Lord. Maybe we need to get busy following Jesus because we have too much time to sin. Let's think about that. The reality is that maybe a lot of things need to change. But unfortunately, a lot of times we get stuck with, I wish that things will get better someday. Rather than actually doing something about it. But doing something about it will probably require some sacrifice. We might have to change things. We might have to give some things up. But Jesus here is obviously concerned about the condition of our hearts, and we really must be too, whatever it takes. I want to read one last passage to kind of hit home our take on this. 1 Peter chapter 1. I said you can go there or you can just listen. I'll give you a minute. This is 1 Peter 1. Okay. 1 Peter 1, and we're going to be reading verses 13 through 16. So Peter, writing this, he says, therefore, gird up the loins of your mind. And we're going to talk about what that means. It says, therefore, gird up the loins of your mind, be sober, and rest your hope fully upon the grace that is to be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, not conforming yourselves to your former lusts, as in your ignorance, but as he who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct, because it is written, be holy, for I am holy. What Peter is telling us about here is that there is going to be a constant battle against sin. It's not that we come to know Jesus and temptation's never there. We need to not be ignorant of the fact that temptation will always be there. Like, we literally still have this body of flesh that wants things that aren't right for us. Like Paul talks about, he says, I'm trying to beat this body into submission because it's wanting things that I know I shouldn't do. It's talked about in Scripture. We can understand that. There's always going to be the battle against sin. That's what Peter's talking about here. It's like maybe we look good on the outside right now. Maybe we're good at putting on a show, but inside there's problems. We need to deal with these things. The point of the 1 Peter passage is don't let your guard down. When it says gird up the loins of your mind, that has that, the picture of that is like a soldier back in the day. They wore these kind of longer things, like I don't know, I think you have like the Scottish kilts or something, but they have like these longer garments that they would wear. But when they got ready for battle, they knew that these things would stop them from being effective in fighting. So they would take them, they would wrap them up, they would bring them around their waist, and they would give more freedom of movement so they could fight more effectively. What Peter is saying is, get your mind ready for the fight. Like sin, temptation is going to be there. We have this understanding that Jesus is teaching us that he cares about our heart. Let's get ready for the fight of keeping our hearts ready to honor him. Peter says, prepare your minds and be ready for this battle. He says, rest your hope on Jesus. Don't go back to that sin that we went for before we knew Jesus. But now realize that a holy and awesome God has called us as his people to be holy because he is holy. Thank you. I'm so thankful. And thank you to him that he didn't say, be holy as I am holy, because we will never live up to that standard. He said, be holy for I am holy. He says, I'm holy, reflect me. You're not going to be perfect. Reflect me. And that holiness isn't just the outward show of the Pharisees. It's our heart. It's our mind. It's our actions. And none of that is hidden from God. And so, should we be sitting here today like, oh no, God is just waiting for me to mess up? Not at all. But hopefully our relationship with him and our understanding of him and our love for him would compel us to do everything that we can to actually live holy before him. These people from our passage in Matthew, they were sitting there on this mountain, they were listening to Jesus. They had grown up through generations of people just arguing over the words of the law and the technicalities of things, following it to the letter but completely missing the heart. Jesus was taking the time to personally teach these people that there's so much more to it than that. Let's make sure we take that same lesson with us today. I believe that he is absolutely worthy of us making any changes, any sacrifices that would be necessary to live right before him, to have our hearts right before him, so that he, at the end of the day, not us, might be glorified by the way that we live. It's not about us, it's about him. But what we do reflects him. That's why our heart matters. That's why Jesus was teaching these people these things. But let's pray.